Hello and welcome to Georgia Bulldogs Live here on the Georgia channel on the Voice of College Football. I am your host, Matt Green. I appreciate everyone tuning in, everyone who's joining live this week. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel and all that good stuff. You got anything to say? Throw in the comments, and I may talk about it on the show. We got to be respectful here, of course, as always. And you can follow me on Twitter at Matt_W_Green. Pretty much talking college football over there, getting in petty arguments like we are ones to do here as college football fans. Just arguing online with strangers. I think that's America's pastime in general in 2025 is just arguing online with strangers. But let's talk about the national championship game that was last night. It was that's the hot topic right now. We're obviously a Georgia show, and we'll get to Georgia here in a minute. And Jackson Johnson, appreciate you chiming in here to the live chat. What's up, Bulldog Nation? Appreciate everyone joining live as always. We do this every Tuesday at 8:00. I guess it's been 8:15 a few times as well. But you get it. We're here. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. So, folks, it's the day after the national championship game. The Ohio State Buckeyes survive a comeback attempt from the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and pull out the game 34-23, and they are your 2024 national champions. I don't know. Does this bug anybody else? When I watch the national championship game, as I do every year, the 2025 patch being on the guys' jerseys in the 2024 national championship game, that bugs me every year. I see it. I don't know why it shouldn't really. I get the game is being played in 2025. Like the 1981 Sugar Bowl was the 1980 national championship for Georgia. But it bugs me every time. It feels like we know the Sugar Bowl, we know the Orange Bowl is being played in whatever year it is. That's how we're going to keep the record. But I felt like the patch was like to remind everybody the games we played in 2025, this is what it's for. And so you just see the team that won the national championship that year. This is the 2024 national champion team. And every picture of the celebration, they'll have a 2025 giant 2025 patch on their jersey for it. So I that's one thing that's bugged me every year. I wonder if it's one of those things that they screwed it up the first year and they're like, now we can't go back. We're stuck on it. So I don't know. I wish it would show the actual year that this is the national championship team of. So that's just one thing I always think about when I watch the national championship. But let's get to my real gripe here. So Ohio State beat Notre Dame last night in the national championship game. How did that make you feel, though? Like, the 12-team playoff was entertaining. Don't get me wrong. Of course, it's going to be entertaining. It's 11 football games, right? Like, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But is that how we want to determine the champion in this sport? Like, don't get me wrong. Ohio State looked like the clear and best team in the country during the college football playoff. Like it's kind of this weird juxtaposition we're in, because on one hand, I think most people believe the best team in college football won the national championship. And in general, that's a good thing, right? But on the other hand, this team literally just had the most underachieving regular season in the entire sport and won the championship. Like, they were preseason number 2. Obviously, Georgia was preseason number 1, and they were disappointing, but Georgia didn't truly underachieve because you looked at the talent on Georgia's offense this year, and it just wasn't really there, and not to mention the strength of schedule, and obviously having to play in the playoff with your backup quarterback. Like, there were some extenuating circumstances for Georgia. Maybe I'm just making an excuse because I'm a Georgia fan, but that's not important right now. Just if you look at Ohio State, like the talent, it was the most talented roster in the country. This was the second time in the last 20 years that Ohio State has lost 2 conference games. Like let that sink in. Like, this is the second time in the last 20 years that Ohio State has lost 2 conference games. Like, that's an insane stat. The other one, I think, was the year Jim Tressel got fired. They went like 8-5, I think. This was the worst year of Ryan Day's career. Like, fans wanted him fired. Like, maybe those fans were extreme and I didn't agree with them, but it's not like they were just like, it was unwarranted. Like, this team had a very disappointing season. The best roster in college football went 10-2, lost to Michigan for the fourth straight year. This time Michigan was unranked. They also missed the conference title game for the fourth straight year. Like, in what world is, like, that's not a good season. You know what I mean? So, and with all that wrapped in, this team won the national championship. Like, people thought that the 12-team playoff is going to help the little guy, right? Give the little guy a shot to win it. No. We gave one of the blue bloods of the sport 2 mulligans, and in the end, talent won out. Like, is that a good story? Like, is that, I don't know. I don't know if it's a good thing. College football had the greatest regular season in all of American sports, for my money. Like, that's what separated it. That's what separated it from every other sport. We just had an amazing season where number 1 played number 3 in the Big Ten championship game. Number 2 played number 5 in the SEC championship game. Both were great games decided by one score. Like, those, we don't get those every year. Like, those monumental win or go home type games in the conference championship. Like, we don't get those that often. And this year we got it. And it's like, oh, well, okay, well, this is fun. Like, I remember talking about it like the week of. It was like, it just had a weird vibe. Because it wasn't a win or go home. And that's what college football is built on, is these win or go home top 5 matchups. And we decided to give teams, 8 through 12 another shot, 8 through 15, like down the stretch, are college ball playoff contenders. But to do that, we sacrifice the importance of these top 5 matchups that, like, are what really get people going for the sport, because there are so few of these elite matchups year in and year out. When you get them, and with all the stakes attached to it, like, that's what makes for a great college football season. And we got two top 5 matchups in conference title games where it was just like, okay, we'd like to win for the seeding, but doesn't really bother us. And on top of that, the losers got the better seeds in the tournament. The losers got the 5 and 6 seeds, which everybody pretty much talked about were going to be the most, kind of the best run of anyone in the playoff, because you got to, one, get a home playoff game, which is just like a nice little bonus for your team. You're playing one of the 11 or 12 seed. And then in the second round, you're potentially playing a team that's not even a top 12 seed, because of this format of the top 4 conference champions getting the top 4 seeds. Penn State and Texas get Arizona State and Boise State in the first round. Like, so not only did you decrease the significance of those huge conference title games, then the losers were really rewarded with this wacky playoff format you had. And it's really unfortunate, because they made it so that the preseason top 5 team, in this instance, Ohio State, goes 10-2 and has a disappointing season, and that's who wins your national championship. And you can still backdoor your way into the playoff if you have a disappointing season, as long as people thought you were going to be good before the season started. If you're preseason number 10 and you go 10-2, I don't have a team off the top of my head that did that. A lot of 9-3 teams in the SEC. A Tennessee, yeah, they also got in the playoff. And was Tennessee a team that was worthy of playing for a national championship by the end of the season? Like, it was just, I'm not gonna sit here and just like bash the 12-team playoff. Like, you guys just don't want to hear that week in and week out. But this was the first 12-team playoff, and it's just, I don't know. I came away just thinking this was unnecessary. All of this and all these weekday games, all the neutral sided travel, all of that, while the transfer portal is going on, while coaches are changing teams and changing jobs, like all of this going on while you're trying to play the playoffs in your sport, it was way too much. So if December is going to continue to be this chaotic, like the 14 model was the only one that made sense, because you basically get all of December off and get all that stuff in line, and then we'll play some playoff games at the end of the season. It obviously, I think this was a better bowl season, so maybe, I'm not sure why. I don't know what the result of that is, but it felt like we had less opt outs this year. I don't know if there's just a one off or if there's a reason why for that, if it's NIL related or something, but I don't know. I think the seating was the biggest problem. I think that everyone is definitely talking about, but that's fixable. Unfortunately, I think the real biggest problem, as long as we want to, wait conference titles, like I kind of want to do, the real biggest problem was just this last wave of conference realignment. It just really threw off the whole sport, in my opinion. Like just decimating the Pac-12 and just scattering their schools across the country, like in the ACC and the Big 12 and the Big 10, if you picked them up at all. And then like Texas and Oklahoma, the real power brands in the Big 12, going to the SEC. Like last year's top five was 5 different conference champions. And granted, this year's top 4 seeds were conference champions and none of them made it to the semifinal. But last year, it felt like that was a year, and obviously the 4 team was flawed in a year like last year. Or was it flawed? Maybe you just really didn't want to keep out Alabama and the SEC champion, but it felt like you probably should have last year. I'm still in the camp that FSU got absolutely robbed. That maybe they could have won. We've seen with some of these, what Jared Verse is in the NFL. We've seen what some of these Florida State guys are doing as rookies. Like they had a lot of talent. Who's to say with a backup quarterback they couldn't have, made some sort of magical run in a 14 playoff, went undefeated and got kind of hosed there. But I got off on a tangent. Last year's top 5 was 5 different conference champions, and it was like you looked at the playoff last year. Like I've seen people show the format of what it would have been last year, and I don't have a graphic for you, but I can read this off to you. Last year would have been 1 Michigan, 2 Washington, which was our national championship game, 3 Texas, and 4 Alabama. Then 5 Florida State was playing 12 Liberty, 6 Georgia was playing 11 Ole Miss, 7 Ohio State was playing 10 Penn State, and then 8 Oregon was playing 9 Missouri. And I wish, just a side, I hope they do avoid rematches in the playoffs, because that, like, seeing Ole Miss Georgia and Ohio State Penn State would have just made no sense. Just go Georgia Penn State and Ohio State Ole Miss, and that would be a fun Big Ten SEC showdown to watch. But yeah, it's like that last year's playoff. I feel like the 12-team format with last year's teams would have been a lot more entertaining. But I think what they've done to the conferences, I don't think we can see that anymore. And I think the biggest thing that they did to the conferences was water down the conference schedules. And so you had a team like Ohio State playing 3 or 4 ranked teams in their season, and a team like Indiana playing 1 the whole year. Like you had Georgia had played how many, 5, 6 ranked teams in their regular season schedule, and that finished ranked. And Texas had 1, and it was Georgia, and they played them twice. So it was just they have to do something about the conference, the discrepancy in the strength of schedule just within a conference. And I think unfortunately, making these conferences so huge, I'm not sure like where you really go from there. So I'm not trying to be a doomsday guy or anything. I know I was just shitting on the college football playoff right there, but maybe I'm just salty because this is the second year in a row that I had to watch, Georgia fans had to watch the national championship game without the Bulldogs playing in it. And also to feel like a second year in a row where you could have been in the national championship game. I'm not going to say that. I'm not saying that Georgia should have been in the playoff last year at all, but I think Georgia was better than Alabama last year, pretty much consistently throughout the season. But in the SEC championship, Georgia didn't get it done. They missed the playoff. It is what it is. But the team that we saw for the first 12 games, I felt like was the best team to go up against Michigan and maybe beat Michigan. Who knows what happens if they hypothetically play. And then this year to see Georgia, I mean, really, the defense just absolutely shackled Notre Dame in that game, but just playing with your backup quarterback, basically had no pulse offensively. And, so you don't really know how much better Notre Dame was than Georgia this year, because this was a flawed Georgia team too, but it was flawed and battle tested. And unfortunately, to go in a game like that without the guy that was going through all those battles and Carson Beck, it just made it real tough. I mean, you look at Georgia's offense last year or this past year, like they couldn't run the ball, they couldn't catch the ball, they didn't block very well. The offense essentially was all Carson Beck. Everything they did was either despite the talent or whatever. Like Carson Beck, for better or worse, he wasn't always playing the best, but for better or worse, Carson Beck was Georgia's offense this past year. So seeing him having to go into that Notre Dame game without your starting quarterback, who was your offense this year, that just makes it tough to swallow, sitting at home and kind of wondering what could have been for the 2024 Georgia Bulldogs. A flawed Georgia Bulldogs, like I said, but there were a lot of flawed teams in college football this year. So it was interesting. I think one bright spot, made this a loser mentality. One bright side of how it happened was I don't think Georgia was going to beat Ohio State on a neutral field. They looked like the best team in college football, but it's always nice to get a little bit further than you did. But a season that ends in a loss is still a season that is just short of what Georgia obviously wanted to do coming into the season. But speaking of those Georgia Bulldogs, that's why we're here. Had to start with the national title game, but we got to give the people what they want. And let's talk about 2025. So Mark Schlabach recently released his way too early top 25 on ESPN.com. And he had the Georgia Bulldogs coming in at number 5. So you look at what Schlabach had to say about Georgia. He's highlighting a lot of the transfer portal guys. I think that's unfortunately Georgia's going to be a lot relying on some of these transfer portal guys to come in and be instant impact players. He talks about Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch at receiver, Jaden Harris and Adrian Maddox and Zion Branch at the safety position. So it'll be interesting to see what Georgia does. He talks about Gunnar Stockton playing well in his first career start, and he did. And Notre Dame appeared to be one of the better defenses in all of college football this year, and that's a tough one to go up against Texas and Notre Dame. The only like live action you've seen in your college football career is tough, especially when you're not the true starter on the team. So Gunnar Stockton's got a whole year to be the guy in the system, or not. I think it'll definitely be an open competition. I think when you don't have a returning starter, I think it's always an open competition. So Gunnar Stockton, the guy who was second string that played a quarter and a half in your biggest games of the season, he's obviously the guy that has the edge there. But Ryan Puglisi was a highly ranked recruit himself, and I think he's the obvious guy to challenge Gunnar Stockton for that starting job. But yeah, I mean, you look at what Georgia is. It's interesting to me. I mean, I think Georgia at this point's being ranked a lot on reputation, because the schedule also doesn't get any easier. You still have to play. You get Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas at home this year. Like, that's going to be nice. But you still have to go to Auburn. You still have to go to Tennessee, play Georgia in Jacksonville, and shoot, you got to go to Atlanta to play the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. But that's the one in Mercedes-Benz, I want to say, next year in 2025. So that'll be a bad decision for Georgia Tech. There's probably going to be more Georgia fans there than Tech fans. But yeah, it's a really interesting year when it comes to Georgia, and rounding out Mark Schlabach's way too early top 25. Like he's got Ohio State 1, Texas 2, Penn State 3, and Notre Dame 4. Um, Penn State, sure. I don't think Penn State's ever a top 3 team in college football. I feel like you can safely pencil them in top 10, but I just don't think they're going to be considerably better next year. But everyone is really high on Arch Manning. The backup quarterback is always the most popular guy on campus, as they say. So we'll see what Texas is. Their schedule is obviously I critiqued Texas schedule a lot last year, and it's the same type of thing again this year. One thing is maybe Florida's improved this year, and so having to go into the swamp is a game that they didn't have to deal with a year ago. But maybe Oklahoma has improved. I don't know, but Texas. Maybe A&M is improved as well. Year 2, I'm always a big year 2 guy. The people will learn that about me. I am a big believer in coaches breaking out in year 2. So A&M, Mike Elko, maybe this is their year to break out, and maybe Texas ends up. And obviously, they do have to come to Athens, and so maybe they end up with a few more top 10, top 15 matchups on their schedule this year. But looking at Georgia, I just feel like I was saying, I feel like they're kind of being ranked on reputation here, putting them at top 5, because this feels like the most unproven roster of the Kirby Smart era. I think when I look at this, who Georgia brings back, this is really just the most unproven roster I can remember. Georgia always seems to have, maybe 1 or 2 guys that are a preseason All-American, maybe a handful, but depending on what year, that are like potential first round picks. And you just look at this year's roster, like go through the years. Like we went into last year, Malachi Starks, Mykel Williams, potential top 5, top 10 picks. Like Jalen Walker was a guy that was freaky, that you knew getting more first team reps that he was going to, be that potential first rounder. Carson Beck had, potential number 1 overall potential coming into the season. If he could be that first quarterback. And like last year, you had Brock Bowers, Amarius Mims, even guys like Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard, Cedric Van Pran were getting like All-American type of looks, if not first round pick. You go to 2022, Jalen Carter, Broderick Jones, Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo. Ringo was a little disappointing, I think, for most people in 2022, but still a hell of a player. Ended up going like 3rd round, I think, with some like injury concerns. And he's been a backup for most of his career so far. But like you've had these proven guys. 2021 was just loaded with them. The Jordan Davis, Trayvon Walker, Quay Walker, like all these guys were kind of potential first round picks coming into the year, and Nakobe Dean. And then guys like Devontae Wyatt and Lewis Cine became first round picks. But even from like a George Pickens was supposed to be on that team, and obviously he was on 2020 and 2019 as like a potential first round type talent. And you had the leadership too. So a guy like Jamari Sawyer, like 2020 had Eric Stokes, Azeez Ojulari, Tyson Campbell, like and even guys like Ben Cleveland and Richard LeCount were those guys, experienced guys that were getting, at least all SEC, potential All-American type of praise coming into the season. And I'm trying to speak specifically as like what these guys were preseason, not necessarily what they ended up doing those years. But like 2019, Andrew Thomas was like the potential number 1 overall pick in the draft. It ended up going number 2. Isaiah Wilson, first rounder. DeAndre Swift, the potential best running back in the country going into his junior year. 2018, DeAndre Baker was the returning Thorpe Award winner. Like you had a guy like Mecole Hardman that was at least like a, one of these 4-3 type guys. And, he didn't necessarily have the season that he wanted. That receiver core was really just loaded in 2018. And no one really put up big stats. And then you go back to 2017, like year 2 of Kirby Smart, Roquan Smith that year was getting a lot of hype. You had Chubb and Michelle, this well-known duo that came back for their senior year. A Lorenzo Carter that was just a freaky athlete people knew about that had potential like first round, capability. I think he ended up going second round, maybe third. But he was just that kind of guy. And this team just doesn't really have that. Like, there's not the projected first rounder, not the projected All-American, not even really that known like leadership type guys. Like quarterback and offensive line are kind of those positions that tend to be like leadership positions on the offensive line, on the offensive side. And there's no, you got a new starter at quarterback, and the team seems to rally around Gunner, right? He's the kind of whatever, he feels the working class kind of QB, it feels like, right? He's gritty, he drives the 1988 pickup truck or whatever. But it's a position where you don't have a proven starter, and so a quarterback is always one of the leadership positions, and maybe Gunnar Stockton is that, and he takes the job and runs with it and has a great season. But there's no Tate Ratledge type guy, a Cedric Van Pran, a Jamari Sawyer type guy that just you just trust of like one of those kind of upperclassmen. This team just doesn't really have that. There's no like real guy that, and like I'm saying, like potential first rounder, there's no guy we really know about right now that's just kind of that freaky athlete, like that's just a prototype, like an Andrew Thomas or a Marius Mims or a Broderick Jones. Like this team has recruited well, but we just don't really know a lot about these guys. And so it's going to be a very interesting year because we've talked about how this schedule is just flipped from a year ago. So it's going to be really tough again. Maybe it's a little easier with some of those home games, but it's all in all, it's the most unproven team I can ever remember under Kirby Smart. So it'll be an interesting year. I think that's for sure. Nolan Smith, put it on a t-shirt. Dogs are going 7-5. You heard it here. Put it in a hype video. Everyone's doubting you. All in all, yeah, it's just the most unproven team I can remember. Now let's talk about those guys that they are bringing back in 2025. So the cupboard is far from bare in Athens, Georgia. But like I said before, I just can't remember a year without a true like face of the franchise kind of guy, if you will. Like I was literally racking my brain on who I should put in the thumbnail for this video. I'm just like, well, last year, Malachi Starks was the guy you saw in like every Georgia promo, or it was Carson Beck. It was like there was just those faces that you'd seen for multiple years. And right now, who are the most proven players on this Georgia roster? Like I'm thinking on the offensive side of the ball, you got Nate Frazier, Oscar Delp, and Lawson Lucky. Like at the tight end position seems solid for sure. But you're not going to win a lot of games, regardless of what the Brock Bowers era has taught some of you people. You're not going to win many games when your tight end is your best offensive playmaker. Brock Bowers was an absolute unicorn. And yeah, if the tight end is the best player on your team, then feed him the rock like Brock Bowers. But Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky are just very solid tight ends. Like I think very good complementary pieces. I'm not here to bash those guys. Bowers was just generational. And then you look at the offensive line, a Monroe Freeling obviously did not have a good showing to end the season against Notre Dame. An Ernest Green who kind of, I think he got hurt and then just kind of lost snaps throughout the season. And so you saw them kind of play those three guys, Green, Freeling, and Xavier Truss at the tackle positions this year. But you lose Truss, you lose the two guards, Ratledge and Fairchild, and then you lose the center, Jared Wilson. Like that's just a lot to lose on an offensive line, as well as, as bad as the receivers were at times for Georgia, as much, and I hate saying they were bad, but I mean, you lead the nation in drops. They weren't performing to their standard. Let's put it that way. And then you also add Trevor Etienne onto that. Like it's a lot of unproven guys on that offensive side of the ball. we know some of the talent that's in that running back room, but it's also some guys that have kind of yet to stay healthy in multiple years on campus. So after Nate Frazier, Cash Jones played the most a year ago, but he's, more used in the receiving game and in pass protection. So you kind of know it's a pass play when Cash Jones is in there. But I mean, that type of back definitely, plays a role in an offense. You need a guy that can be good out of the catching the ball out of the backfield, especially in pass protection. But yeah, you didn't bring in a bunch of highly ranked running backs in this year's class. You had the decommitment on signing day to Florida State. So, it's interesting. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball, like that's where all the 5-star recruits are always in Kirby Smart's recruiting classes. And you got a CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson, two guys that, played really, really well. Like these guys are not Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker. They're the starters and they're returning, but they're not guys that are really getting first round talk right now. And maybe they do. Maybe they have a great season and they become that. They were big time prospects coming out of high school. But you got a Dalen Everett who, played out of his mind against Texas both times. But, he definitely gave up some plays in the pass game, but I think he's definitely your best corner coming into the year. And then Christian Miller, it was big to bring him back on the defensive line. And then KJ Bolden, obviously he's not a player who can get drafted next year, coming into his sophomore year. But KJ Bolden feels like one of those guys, probably the guy that's got the most. It feels like if one player on Georgia's defense becomes a star next year, KJ Bolden feels like the best candidate for that, just after having such a good freshman season. But yeah, like there's just a lot of solid pieces that we're bringing back defensively. So it'll be interesting. But what we have to remember here is that Kirby Smart is the best recruiter in college football. And if that still matters, I guess, I think Benjamin Franklin is probably the best recruiter in college football these days. But as long as it still matters, Kirby Smart knows how to get damn good classes. And the 2024 class was the number one recruiting class in the country. And like the top 5 members of the 2024 class that I've yet to, I should say this. These are my top 5 members of the 2024 recruiting class that have yet to make an impact. So let me get my my graphic up here. Let me say that again. So 2024 class. I botched that whole thing. Let me start over. 2024 class was the number 1 recruiting class in the country. And a couple guys made an impact already. We saw Nate Frazier on the offense. We saw KJ Bolden start, I think, almost every game this year. So they did contribute in 2024. Those are the only real guys that like got starter type minutes in 2020, or starter type snaps, I should say, in 2024. So these are my top 5 breakout candidates from that 2024 class, because I think, second year guys that from the number 1 class in the country, like there's going to be unproven guys that turn into really good players. Like that's what Georgia football is. Unfortunately, because of the transfer portal, you can't count on it as much as you could maybe a couple years ago, that whoever emerges as that starter is going to be an absolute dude. And so right now, I think there's several members of the 2024 class that are potential breakout guys in 2025. So I got to start first with Chris Cole. Chris Cole was the one I think I would argue is probably the 3rd biggest contributor from the 2024 team. So maybe that's cheating a little bit because we did get to see a decent amount of Chris Cole on the field. I think Chris Cole, he flashed, in my opinion, more than CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson this year. Like he's just so physically imposing, long arms, like dude looks like an athlete. And some of the guys I get most excited about, and maybe I'm jumping jumping the shark. I don't know if that's what jump the shark means, but putting the cart before the horse, maybe that's the expression I'm going for, because CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson were previously this type of guy, but in the past, Kirby Smart defenses, those true freshmen that come in are like third down specialists. Like, I feel like that's where the potential like superstars are, like the Trayvon Walker as a true freshman, like Nakobe Dean as a true freshman, like some of these guys that played, those roles in the those third down situations always seem to be guys that turn into the next star. And I feel like Chris Cole, so early, I think it was even the Clemson game, first game of the year, you already saw him in some of those packages. And so I think Chris Cole is a good candidate to break out this year. We still got Raylan Wilson and CJ Allen in that room, but you've seen the way this Georgia defense and Glenn Schumann and how they'll get linebackers on the field. So if you're one of the best players on the field, they'll find a spot for you. Jalen Walker, another great example of a guy as a true freshman, just came in to just go nuts on third down. Second on the list, I would say, I'm not saying this guy's disappointing. I will say what I was most disappointed about was not seeing Ellis Robinson really play any meaningful snaps in 2024. And that's not to say, he should have played. What are we doing? Coaches need to be fired. I'm not here for any of that type of talk. But you get what some people think is the number one player in the country, especially a corner. And I imagine, a Patrick Peterson, right? A guy that's just a two-way player, maybe a Derek Stingley Jr., like a guy who's just a dude from day one. And, not saying Ellis Robinson won't break out and have a great year this year, but I was just hoping, especially with that second corner spot being kind of, what's the term? Just a pill in their side. Is that a term? I don't know. I'm making up expressions now, but you get what I'm trying to say. That second cornerback spot this year was just it provided some struggles for Georgia. Like whether it was Julian Humphrey and Daniel excuse me. Julian Humphrey and Daniel Harris kind of going back and forth in that position as the year went on. It seemed like most pass plays that Georgia gave up this season were on that cornerback number 2, right? So you have a guy that was the number one player in the country. I was just hoping he would be a guy that'd come in and make an instant impact. So people always showed that rep, and I don't know if it was just one rep. Anything can happen one rep, but I think it was the camp as a whole that Jeremiah Smith, and we saw what Jeremiah Smith was. I can't stop talking about Jeremiah Smith. I don't know how I did that Ohio State conversation without mentioning Jeremiah Smith, but this guy looks like the best receiver in college football as a true freshman. And there was a camp in high school where Ellis Robinson was essentially the only guy that could guard him. And so if you're that kind of guy, I was hoping that this guy could be an impact player as a true freshman, but seeing coming into 2025, I definitely I want to see Ellis Robinson make his way onto the field. And I think he's obviously that kind of talent. The third one, and I think this third one, is a guy who would have made an impact, but the injuries really cut his 2024 season short. And that's Joseph Jonah Ajonye. Like this guy, super big time coming out of high school. Like everyone was raving about what he was doing in practice last year coming in. And that defensive line is just really unproven. So, losing Nazir Stackhouse, losing Michael Williams, losing Warren Brinson, who am I forgetting? Terrian Ingram Dawkins. Like you're losing a lot of experience on that defensive line. Georgia needs Joseph Jonah Ajonye, who I had it pulled up over here. What was he? He's top 10 player in the country. This lists him 29 on 3. That's the composite, like the whatever they call it, industry, the on 3 industry ranking. So Ellis Robinson was number 2 in that, and KJ Bolden 24, Chris Cole 32. So some of the highest ranked players Georgia signed a year ago. So Joseph Jonah Ajonye, was he 6'4", 275 coming out of high school? Like I expect this guy to make a difference on Georgia's defensive line in 2025. And then the other highly ranked guy coming out of high school, the other highest ranked player coming out of high school from the same school as Joseph Jonah Ajonye, was the number one linebacker in the country, Justin Williams. Like obviously there's only a certain number of linebackers you can get on the field, and Georgia's trying to get as many as possible because that's seems to be their strongest position right now. But you saw Chris Cole get on the field as a true freshman. Justin Williams also played a little bit, but not quite as much. I'm hoping they get a number change, maybe 18 and 19. They look too similar. It throws me off. So if you guys care about me, maybe one of you guys can upgrade to a single digit or something. But yeah, Justin Williams, number one linebacker in the country coming out of high school. I'm really curious to see what he can do in 2025. And then the last one is Quintavious Johnson. And everyone's going to talk about it, but I feel like I have to mention it. This guy was 6'4", 255 edge rusher, which is, really big for an edge rusher. I don't know if he's going to play that outside linebacker role or more of a hand in the dirt kind of guy. I would think you're more of a hand in the dirt kind of guy at that size coming out of high school, but 6'4", 255 in high school and played quarterback. And he made some plays at quarterback. So this guy is just kind of freaky athletic. People have talked about him a lot in practice at times. So Quintavious Johnson is a guy, especially with that outside linebacker room. Damon Wilson, I would say the two biggest departures of this season, I would say so far, that I was maybe just because I was not counting on them, are Trevor Etienne and Damon Wilson. Like Damon Wilson hadn't been like a superstar or anything, but he was really coming on, and just Chaz Chambliss leaving that outside linebacker room, Jalen Walker going pro. Like you were losing a lot of experience there. And so to lose Damon Wilson on top of that, and you lost Sam Mpimba, the big time recruit as a true freshman as well. And maybe he was buried on the depth chart and he wasn't one of those guys, but it's interesting, the lack of experience. So I fully expect Quintavious Johnson to get a shot, to get some snaps at that outside linebacker room. And I think he could definitely make a difference in 2025. And then on the offensive side of the ball, so those are my top five on defense, because on the offensive side of the ball, I got my honorable mentions because I don't really know how much of an impact these guys are going to make, because we talked about Georgia in the transfer portal. It feels like Georgia's kind of relying on some transfer portal guys being some of their best targets in the pass game. But I think Nitro Tuggle, I think most people expect to make some sort of an impact. He got on the field a little bit late in the season this year, flirted with the transfer portal, but in the end decided to stay at Georgia. And then another guy you saw get on the field a little bit was Sakovi White. And maybe Sakovi White is I feel like he was always supposed to be more of a gadget guy, maybe that running back kind of wide receiver hybrid. So, maybe we see him get some of those looks that an Anthony Evans or something was getting a year ago. And maybe Sakovi White is a return man in this in 2025. I'm just throwing that out of nowhere. I don't even know, because Malachi Starks, excuse me, Malachi Starks was basically the punt returner the last several games of the year, and then Anthony Evans. So yes, that punt return position is open. But I think we want that one to be Zachariah Branch, the USC transfer. So yeah, getting Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas, those guys are definitely going to be a big part of Georgia's offense next year. But don't overlook Nitro Tuggle and Sakovi White. There's going to be a lot of new names in that receiving core this year to go along with Dylan Bell, who maybe we see Dylan Bell being used a little more in the run game with how much inexperience Georgia has in that room. So one thing I'll say, Dylan Bell, if you're listening to the show, as I know you are, I know that all the Georgia players, diehard fans of the show, we got to get a single digit. If Dylan Bell's going to be a running back, get him number 8 or something. I'm not trying to take anybody's number. Give him a single digit so he can not be rocking an 80s number back there in the backfield. So that's my take. Dylan Bell, if you're listening, you got to get on that. Get yourself a single digit. Well, that's all I have, everyone. I appreciate everyone for tuning in to the show this week. We come to you every Tuesday, 8 o'clock or 8:15. However I'm feeling, and then always come to you with post game shows during the season, as well as some breaking news videos. We'll get on here sometimes. So thanks for everyone for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe. Give me a follow on Twitter. Once again, that's Matt_W_Green. And have yourself a good night and go Dogs.